out! I can't believe I let you in here! I can't believe those things you've just said to me! How dare you! Wait till Ronnie gets back and finds out what you've done and what you've said, and you wait till he gets you, okay?
Mum, I didn't go.
Oh, Nikki. Why? This was your big chance. Mr. Warner worked really hard to get you that interview. They don't just take anyone.
It's just... I don't know. I think there's more to life than working for the government and sitting in front of a computer screen, that's all.
But you could work your way up. It's the biggest and best company around here. There's plenty of opportunities for promotion. Imagine that.
I can imagine it, that's the problem. Never understood why you came here in the first place.
It was before you were born.
I'm in a meeting. Tell them to ring back. They'll have to wait. Sorry. Look, let's just run through a few practice questions before we finish for the day.
First question, a little bit about your biography. You were born in England, but you passed, you lived a large part of your childhood in Karachi, no? Close to Afghan border.
Not so close to the Afghan border, but close enough, and in an interesting moment, because when I was living there, it was the end of the 70s, beginning of the 80s, so obviously a peak moment in the Cold War politics of the region.
So how did you experience this clash of the Cold War coming to Pakistan and the Russian-American conflict in a certain way coming closer to you?
Well, interestingly, I made a whole body of work about it called Encroachments, which debuted at the Sharjah Biennial just last year in 2019, although that seems a long time ago now. But it was it's interesting because I think as a child, you have a certain innocence where actually you see a lot of these things as game, you know, as games. And then it's only on reflection that you realize the larger sort of meta realpolitik in which, you know, you've been playing your games. So, for example, you know, I noticed we lost bars and nightclubs from Karachi, but we gained video games. And interestingly, it was only, you know, later as an adult and in this body of work, Encroachments, I could look back and, you know, there's been, I don't know how many PhDs written about the use of science fiction films as anti-Soviet propaganda in the 50s, but much less has been written about the use of video games as anti-Soviet propaganda in the 80s. So games like Space Invaders, Defender were exported to Pakistan and many other third world allies as buffers against Soviet communism. And if you start to interrogate and deconstruct these games, you know, Space Invaders, Defender, it's all about territorial integrity. And at the same time as you have, you know, all of us kids becoming addicted to these games, you have airdrops into neighboring Afghanistan by both the Soviets and the Americans. So, you know, you are living in this condition of sort of propaganda, whether you're conscious of it or not.
I think it's a psychic moment which is important to you also because it's part of your autobiography.
Absolutely. I think, you know, it's that, and also that central theme of othering or otherness. You know, if you never quite fit in, because also when I go back to Karachi now, I've become too English, and in English, you know, in England, I'm always an immigrant. So there's this interesting, yes, as you say, almost an autobiographical lack of fixity, which I feel is, you know, essential to the way I see the world and make my work.
معروفة حتى هما كانوا ديال الجنون قبل ما يجي الإسلام ولا على الأقل الفكرة ديالو. كانت بابا مغيمة حمراء كي شي مراية كتشوف فيها غروب الشمس حمر بحال الدم. كان بعض المرات واعد تفرق ما بين الخيال والحقيقة. الأحداث سبقوا الواقع وخلاونا نحسوا بالاحتمال ديال الجنون والأشباح. بنتي الكنز ديالي ما عرفتش اش ولات. تنفكر بصعوبة صورتها، تنسد بالجهد عينيا تنتعسر بحال معصومة. والو ما عرفتش واش خاصني نحشم ولا نتخلع حيت ما كنحس بوالو.
Your major cycle, which you started in 2017, Leviathan, is playing with science fiction because it's set in the future, but a near future. But it has two of the big subjects, migration and climate change. So can you talk a little bit about first the titles of the film, which are always the name of a protagonist, who is a protagonist in the film, and this concept of having one protagonist and talk about something much more general?
Interestingly, when I was first, and actually I should probably say I wasn't even conceiving of Leviathan at that point. I was originally, because I write as well as make films and paintings, but I was working on a commissioned text for Eflux Journal on the subject of democracy. And normally I'm very good with deadlines, but 2 years after my deadline, I was still struggling with this with this essay for quite obvious reasons. But it was that one where finally my editor at Eflux called me up and just said, "What's going on? This isn't like you. Where are you up to? Have you written anything?" And I said, "I've actually got tens of thousands of words of notes." But I said they're essentially, contradictory, but not just contradictory in a binary sense, but almost in a sense of multiple personality disorder, because I shift, and so you realize that, you might be a Marxist at breakfast, a fascist by lunchtime, and then a social democrat by dinner. And you realize that if I find it this hard to struggle with my own deconstruction of democracy, how do we as a society begin to even, collectively imagine how we function together? And so Brian, my editor at Eflux, had a very, very interesting suggestion. He said, "Why don't you approach it as fiction?" And I said to him, "You don't publish fiction." And he said, "We could start." And I said, "Well, I don't write fiction." He said, "Most of your theoretical papers are pretty much fiction anyway." And
science fiction or fiction?
Well, at that point, it wasn't clear. But what followed was I then started to think of Kurosawa's Rashomon, and to think about what was so unique about the structure of Rashomon is it's the same events from different characters' eyes. It does this thing where it shows the sort of radical subjectivity of actually time.
Yeah.
And so I thought, well, I need to. Maybe the way to present this is to put the different, not just opinions I had, but different research I'd encountered into multiple characters' voices. And then how they move from the sort of pathology of the subjective to the general. And that started to become the structure from which Leviathan evolved.
So this is the part of the fiction. Now comes the second part, which is the science. You have a very deep and intense relation to science in these films also.
I think, for the longest time, whether it's through my writing, thinking, or making, I've been very, very committed to finding new methodologies, not just for myself as an artist, but with a social function. So I'm very committed to kind of new methods of transdisciplinary action. I think it's one of the great failings of sort of academia up to this point. And I say that I also, am an academic as well in my spare time. So I think, for me, I was very keen to explore with Leviathan a new methodology for combining fictional poetics that art enables, art and literature enables, and with scientific research, but also with the social sciences, and where the social sciences on a spectrum bleed into activism. So it was, as you say, how do we get to some kind of holistic transdisciplinary methodology?
Why do you choose film as a medium for the way to have your scientific subjects and social subjects and to treat them, and because you are you are originally a painter, as you say?
For me, to be honest, I trained with both film and painting, which it took years for people to understand how I could possibly do both. And again, I think that's a very last century failure of imagination. You know, for me, both painting and film are about editing in space. And in that way, film is the absolute perfect medium for this kind of, transdisciplinary work, because you can take something that would take, years of reading and distill it into a visceral cut in an edit. So to better explain that, I can move from a character talking about a sort of journey from the personal to the holistic, and then cut it with an image of overfishing. And then you get a visceral affect as the audience from that cut. That cut is not just something that you pick up or register mentally, you register it bodily if it's done well. And for me, it's like, how do you get an audience, how do you accelerate their understanding of complex subjects?
La chitarra gridò, una ninanata dolorosa, un suono crescente, stridente, elettrico. Diventiamo un tutt'uno con i vecchi dei, col mare profondo, dove riposano i fantasmi delle civilizzazioni che precedono la nostra. Ora, come sempre, abbiamo adorato il verme che ha infestato le nostre feci, un grande divoratore della nostra merda intestini, i batteri e la materia di scarto da cui il verme cresce grasso e ben nutrito. Che gioia meravigliosa a comprendere il nostro posto nell'evoluzione. Siamo le carogne che nutriranno i nostri denti. Eravamo gli eletti da Dio e così eravamo liberi di fare quello che volevamo. Il tempo e l'isolamento l'hanno dimostrato.
A last question. Your films use talking about Leviathan, very aesthetical cinematographic language, especially including the scientific images, which are very beautiful, because they are strange to us. So, concerning this aesthetical quality, the beauty, what is beauty for you?
I think I'd be lying to you if I didn't say there was an aesthetic formalism to everything I do. I think that's also the function of how I bring painting to cinema. So just even in terms of the coloring and the grading of my films, it's very painstaking and obsessive. And I think that comes from this dual role as a painter and a filmmaker, which I see one as essential and intrinsic to the other. And then in terms of, forbidden beauty, it's also about this mode of alterity. So for me, if I can show, for example, in the most recent episode 6 of Leviathan, I was working with a senior marine biologist from the Weizmann Institute, and his work on microbiology. For me, it was immediately there was a resonance with Len Lai's films, you know, like Color Box and others, in terms of how scientists are viewing zooplankton and other microbes in the oceans. And then you have these crazy wars of attrition in the ocean between microbes that actually are having these, you know, huge world wars or oceanic combats. But it looks like a Len Lai film, and that, for me, is what I'm talking about when I talk about the visceral. But it also connects to your thematic of forbidden beauty. How do we show something that is actually, you know, and what is beauty for me? How do we show something that opens a door to a new way of thinking? For me, that is the ultimate beauty. Is, oh my God, it's an opener. It's a beauty that opens something in you that you had never considered before, either and it has to be simultaneously at a visceral and a formal level. So it's a heart-mind combination where it radically alters how you think.
تيطيحوا من الطريق وتيزيحوا على الخراب، تينزلوا على الحجر جايين لجهتنا بحال شي زلموميه مقابله شي دوده. هادو ماشي الزوار اللي نزلوا من الباطن اللي غرقادين شحال، هادو ولاد البلاد. يلا نسرقوهم ونقتلوهم قبل ما ينزلوا الناس ديال الباطن باش نتلاهاو وندوزو الوقت. وهادشي اللي قال منصف هاكا تيضيع الوقت هو من صغرو. شحال خايب تهلق بالفراغ، هذاك الشعر اللي كيطيح بحال البسخ اللي كيتفرتف من لوجاه، بحال شي دواره كتحط فيها كاع افكارك المنحرفه. خرعات يا ريحتو باش يفكرنا في مذاق الحار ديال الوجود، بحال ريحه القتيل، ريحه الجيفه ديال الحيوان، بحال ديال بنادم. دايره غير بحال شي انذار، بحال شي كادو متخط.